Greetings. In this video, we will build and rig a mid-level insect, in this case a butterfly. In our previous lessons, we built a simple butterfly with just 3 parts. The body was a single part and 2 wings, and a very simple rig, a joint for each of those, a 3-joint rig. We will build on that today. We will extrude legs and a proboscis for the butterfly. And then we'll talk about the final level of insect modeling and rigging and how we might build on our intermediate to get that level of detail. If we look here, that butterfly tongue or proboscis in the mid just has a single joint. And for a mid-distance shot, that might be enough. As well, the abdomen, the tail end is just moving as a single unit. Whereas in this more sophisticated version, more complex detailed, it's deforming according to several joints. So we've completed a 3-joint chain. Today we'll create several joints, and I'll show you how you can build out. And that'll set you up to understand the more complex 3rd generation version of the insect. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to open my original insect and get you started in case you hadn't saved a rigged unanimated version. Okay, so here's our simple butterfly loop flying along a path. If you saved your rigged unanimated version, you can just start from there. Let's say that you didn't, and it's also helpful to know just how to break a rig down backwards. When you're getting rid of animation, you want to be at 0, frame 0 typically, because that's where your animations start, and that is your object in a neutral position. If we come to the 4 view, we can see at frame 1, it's straight up and down along that z-axis. So if we deleted our rig when it was here, the model would be stuck in that position. So come to frame 0, and we can just delete that curve. I'm also going to delete my lights just to make the outliner a little bit cleaner. I'll hit the F key to zoom in on that. Make sure you're in the middle. You deleted that curve path animation, and we're sitting on an axis here. Shift key to open that. Just to review, our root has downchained the body, the 2 wing joints, and then the 2 wing surfaces parented to those joints. We'll get rid of this path node. We'll say ungroup, and shift click that again. And we're also going to unparent these wings. So I've selected the 2 wing joints. I'm going to come to default shader, which is here, so we can see this more clearly. So I have the 2, and I'll come to edit unparent, right? And that got rid of the bones. I'm going to set those wings on a layer here. Now for this intermediate, this middle version, we'll leave the wings separate. For the advanced insect, we'll create a totally continuous surface. But this middle one is going to have more detailed legs. We'll bind it, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll keep those wings separate. For that 3rd generation, we will have a continuous surface. Now, for the root, I also want to get rid of this joint. We'll create a new position after we have our legs and additional joints. So this is probably not where we want that joint. So we will unparent our body, edit, unparent, and then now we can select that root and delete it. I'll open both of these, and this is what your outliner should look like. You have a body that isn't parented to anything, and then you have your 2 wings parented to 2 joints, and we'll reincorporate that at the end after we're complete with the model. Now we're going to be extruding along a path. We haven't done that yet. And so let me show you that in isolation. I'm going to make a 3rd layer and just hide the body so we can concentrate on extruding along a path. We know, you know, that we can pick an object and you can hit extrude and you can pull that out and you've doubled the number of faces. We can also have that follow along a path. I'm going to come to Create, Curves, CV Curve Tool, Create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. I'm going to grid snap just my first 2 vertexes, and then we can draw out a path, crazy long path here. And we'll have this face extrusion follow along that path. A couple of things to keep in mind. We're selecting a component and then a object. The curve is considered being selected in object mode. Sometimes you'll get stuck in one or the other, or the selection doesn't work. Just go back into object mode, have everything deselected, and try that again if you have problems. And it may happen to me as I'm working, and I'll re-emphasize that. But we're picking a face, which is a component, and then shift selecting a curve. So sometimes that can be finicky when you're selecting two different mode types. We'll come here and we'll hit extrude, and then you might say, well, that just followed the total length of the curve, which is true. We have to come in and now insert the proper number of divisions for that curvature to work. A couple of things to consider. This is large, and these junctures here, when we were turning the curve vertexes, are tight. But we'll tackle that in a minute. We'll tackle that in the context of the project. So things to think about when you're extruding: if you have a tight curvature, you have to come back and relax the geometry after the fact. But that came along the total length for our insect legs and that long mouthpiece, the proboscis. We will come into the channel box and then come to taper. And let's say I type in 0.1, 10%. So now it's gradually going down to 10% of the size. We still have some funky geometry here. This geometry actually relaxed because of the taper. You can experiment with giving yourselves even more divisions to see if that helps. And this is just a tight corner here. So what would we do? This is just a standard mesh now. And we could come and grab an edge and relax that a little bit. And maybe we would just need an extra edge loop in here. So we could come and add that edge loop. You can pull out the outside edges. So maybe these are placed okay. So we wouldn't want to double click to get the loop, but maybe I just want to contour this outside edge. So a lot of times when you're extruding, if you have a tight curve, you'll want to come back and just manually position that geometry. And then when we hit the number 3 key to see what the actual smooth would be, if, from this angle, you can see that that looks kind of like an insect leg. Again, we're modeling today for a middle distance, so for an extreme close-up, this probably wouldn't work, but at a distance like this, that would be fine. Proximity to the camera is always an issue in terms of the detail level of your model. And then what you want your model to be doing is what drives the complexity of your rig. So you're thinking about detail level of the model in proximity to the camera, and then what you're rigging, what you want the model to do in terms of the complexity of the rig. That's why that initial butterfly with just flapping wings at a distance was a simple model and a simple rig, but it functioned very well. And even in the midst of full-on production, you could use that simple butterfly for a distance. If you had butterflies flying in the background or flying in a natural setting where the camera's not super close, even that simple butterfly that you created, 3 or 4 weeks into your first animation project, you could use in much more elaborate productions. So there is our extrusion. Let me talk about a few other things before we get back to the lesson. Let's create a cube, and this time we'll subdivide it. So channel box, and we'll hit 2s. And if I grab 2 faces and extrude, right, they are a single piece. If I came back and grabbed that face, right, they are connected. But for many applications, you want to extrude and turn keep faces together off. So we'll turn that off, slide that out, and now if I were to scale these down, right, they are independent of each other. And we'll be doing this for 3 legs. Right, if I grabbed all of these and hit extrude, and then keep faces together was off, right, they're independent of each other. So give that a shot. Make sure you know how to turn cube faces together off. And then finally, before we begin, we want to extrude, we want to get our curve right in the middle of the face so that that face is following equidistance along the curve. We will come to display, poly, face centers. And that gives us a little vertex that we can snap to, or a center point that we can snap to. When you click off, it goes off, so if you come to wireframe mode, you'll be able to see those in wireframe mode. And just a reminder, we went to display, poly, face centers. That's where you turn it off and on. Display, polygons, face centers. And I'm going to move this up so we're not mistaking the snapping with the grid, or we could even hide the grid. And so what I want to be able to do is start my curve here. So we'll say create curve tool, CV curve tool, and with the V key, right, you can see I can snap to that point or that point, but I can also snap to those centers. So I can snap to that center, and then we'll draw this out in our orthographic view. So I'll come and, right, we can complete that. There is that curve exactly in the center, even though my cube isn't. And actually we'll just scale that down a little bit. And we're picking the face and then the curve, and we'll hit extrude. We need to give it number of divisions. Come to the channel box, come down to taper, and you can put 0.1, and you've got a shape. Let me, before I finish this, let's say you clicked off. Let's turn off those face centers, sorry. And you say, oh, I forgot to taper it. How do I get back? Well, just pick the surface, come to the channel box, come down to inputs. There is your poly extrude, and down towards the bottom is where you find taper. So we'll put 0.1, and we've got that. And if you hit 3, you can see what that smooth preview would be like. Okay, let's incorporate this for our model. We'll come and hit the F key. We'll get in there nice and tight. Just make sure you're on the center line, right? We're going to be mirroring one side to the other, so we don't want this rotated anyway. You can see the rotations are 0, 0, 0 for the body. We'll work in the block model mode. The 1 key, this is the true surface. We haven't smoothed it. Remember that 3 just gives us a preview for what we'll actually smooth. I'm going to come and move this edge. Now you can move an edge, and you can see that the edge itself isn't contouring along the body. It's just moving in world space. If you want to get the edge to contour along the body, it is Mesh Tools, Slide Edge, and you can use your middle mouse button to slide along the surface. And you see I'm not deforming the surface. It's following the contour of the existing surface. So Slide Edge tool, or you could just move it and recontour. And then I'm going to give myself just one more. So Control key for the edge loop, and I'm just going to eyeball this. I'm not holding the Shift key. I'll just put it about there. And we wanted these 3 faces for our insect. Now, insect legs on a butterfly, the 2 rear legs are large and the front 2 legs are much smaller. We'll model them all the same size, and then once we bind it, we can shrink those front legs. It'll be easier that way. So let's give ourselves first the space for this to come out, and actually, you know, we'll do the bottom side here. And we'll hit extrude, and I want keep faces together off. And I'm going to pull those out in world space. I'll click back to local space, click a cube, and we can scale those down. So I pulled them out in world space, went back to local space, and now I'm scaling them. And what we want is something close to a cube, a square, I should say, and so we'll scale those in, giving ourselves a little bit of a square. Now these aren't completely flat. When we're extruding NURBS surfaces, those first 2 points, the curve path itself has to be in an exact 90 degree or you have a strange offset. The poly extrude along a path is a little more forgiving. So the fact that these faces aren't sitting at a right angle or we're not trying to calculate that path at a right angle, that's okay. We'll start with this middle one. In object mode, we'll come to display polys, face centers. And now we can lay down our first point of our curve. Create curve tools, CV curve tool. And the V key, we're snapping to all these different points or face centers and we'll land there. The side view is probably our best bet. It's black here. If you wanted to see it in the default, click there. Don't forget that this is what turns on your default. A lot of times you have textures applied. You'll turn this on and then you won't remember, how come I can't see my textures? I'm clicking the textures, but I don't see them. That's because you have selected default. We'll click out here. That would be, about a right angle. My middle mouse button to update that in real time. And then we'll draw this out, and we know that we'll have an issue here, so we'll try to be delicate on that bin. And you can squish it back together after the fact. Like I said, you can come in and really do some fine-tuned modeling. And these legs, something like that. Again, this is for a middle distance shot. This is not for close-ups, but just your butterfly lands on a flower in a middle distance, and you want to be able to see the legs and that interesting, long, curved, tongue-like shape. So we've got that there. Hit enter when I'm done. We're going to select the face, select the curve. Sometimes it can be finicky when we try to pick a component. The face is a component. And shift select the curve. If it does act up or you're not able to select, just click off, get back right. I don't have anything selected. Switch back and forth here, and then we'll start again if you have problems selecting. So we'll select that face, shift select this curve, we'll hit extrude. It follows the total length. We need to give ourselves enough divisions. And 12 is about right. We're going to do this for each leg, so you can remember what we had there. 12 looks all right. We'll come into the channel box, come down to taper. We'll put in 0.1, and we have our leg. We can hit the 3 key to see how that'll look, and that looks like a leg. You can kind of zoom out and make sure you've got the right proportions, and that is good enough. And you can lengthen it, as I said after the fact. We'll shorten these front legs, and if we wanted to lengthen the rear legs according to the joint chains, we can do that. So that looks good, and we didn't do this all at once just because we wanted to be able to manipulate that curve. If I come in and grab that curve, now I can right-click it and choose Control Vertex, and those will come on, and we see that they're pink. Let me just come back to object mode. You can also pick it and manually go to component mode if you were having problems right-clicking it. And note, we can pick a vertex, and with the arrow keys on the keyboard, we can move through. And this is the area, you might want to relax those. I'm using the arrow keys on the keyboard to change, to scroll through the vertexes, and then I'm moving them, and you can go through it that way. We're not going to worry too much. If I hit the 3 key, we can see maybe this, maybe that is too far out actually. So let's correct that. I wanted to show you why we're doing it on 1, because we want to make these corrections. So let's say I grab that, and we'll pull that up and use my arrow key to come out here to this one, and just making these a little bit closer. We'll come back and grab that curve 1 if it's easier to select in the outliner, obviously, and we're going to duplicate it. And for the second and third leg, we want to have the pivot at the end of the curve so that we can snap the existing curve. We're not going to draw new curves. We're going to use this existing curve, and we'll snap the pivot to the end point. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm actually going to, let's come up to isolate select. So I've just got curve 2 selected. I just want to concentrate on it. So we'll come to isolate select, this one here, and we just have it. Move it over a little bit just so it's not in that same place. And I want to put the pivot here. So right, the D key to move the pivot, and the C key, middle mouse button, to snap. So you can see that that's snapped along the curve, and we'll just pull it to the end. D key to get back out of pivot mode. I'll come back and click on isolate select, and we've got that there. And where do we want it? Well, this is, if we hit the 5 key, maybe a little easier to see, this is where we want to snap it to. So I've got it here, and I'll just hold down the V key, middle mouse button, and we'll snap it. We'll duplicate it, and we don't have to do anything with the pivot. It's already in place, and we'll V-snap it. And now I missed that, right? Sometimes easier to pull off, and as I say, you want to push onto the thing that you're snapping to, not drag the thing that you're snapping. So V key, middle mouse button, and I got that snapped there. If you wanted to, as I mentioned, extruding polys is a lot more forgiving than extruding NURBS. So we can actually kind of rotate that one back, and if we wanted to rotate that one forward, we'll still get a decent extrusion. We'll pick that. It's in component mode. Shift select the curve. Sometimes that can be finicky. If it is, just come to object mode, click off, and start from scratch. But we'll pick that face, shift select that curve, come to modeling, hit extrude. We remember that it was 12, so you can just scrub up to 12. And we want to taper, so we'll come to the channel box, come down to taper, and we'll type in 0.1. And we have it. And then thirdly, we'll come and grab that face in component, shift select the curve. And now here it is being finicky. I was just mentioning that. The other 2 times I demonstrated it, it didn't do it. But now it's not allowing me to select that. So I'm going to come back, make sure I'm in object mode, pick that face, shift select the curve. It stayed in object mode. And then we'll come and hit extrude. We'll scrub up to 12. Come to the channel box. Come down to taper. And we have our 3 legs. We'll jump up into the orthographic top view, and I want to be in object mode. In fact, let's turn these centers off. Display, poly, face centers. We're going to select 1/2. This is half without the legs, obviously. Now I missed a little bit of that tail or abdomen. 1 mode, and we'll select that and delete it. So I've got everything there. And this is on the x-axis, it's in the positive x-axis. So we'll come to mesh, mirror, it's x plus, we'll hit mirror, and now we have it. Before we continue, always advocating that you increment and save. And one other reason to increment and save is we've got quite a bit of history here. And you might want to go back and change something. So having it saved with your history intact is always a good idea. But as we progress, I don't want to have to fish around through all these inputs if I'm not actually going to be making any changes. So this is an example of when we come to edit, delete by type. Now, at this point in the semester, you may have multiple things in the scene, so we're generally not going to be using all by type. Be very specific. So I have this selected as an object, delete by type, history. And you see all those inputs are gone. And it's cleaner to see. This is lighter. The computer is remembering less. And it's essential that you do that before we actually bind and rig. So as we're going, you want to save a version with history. That makes a lot of sense. But as we progress, we'll delete the history. Now let's do that proboscis, that long, funny butterfly tongue or mouthpiece. But we want to make a tighter little shape here. So I've got all 4 of these selected, and we'll hit extrude. Make sure that you don't have anything else selected. I'm going to come to world space, click the cube, scale that down, kind of pushed it inward, so we'll pull it outward. And that's about the size that we want. Now I don't need to turn on a face center here because I have a vertex there. But if you had a face and you were trying to extrude out from here, you could turn that center on there. We'll just draw right from it. So we'll come and grab our CV curve tool and V-snap that first one. And then we'll jump into our orthographic view. And if you want to have a picture of a butterfly, or if you're modeling another insect, obviously having the references there for you. And we'll bring this around, something like that. And here we're going to be extruding all 4 faces. We'll hit extrude. Oops, excuse me, I forgot to select the curve. We'll hit extrude. And this is going to require quite a few divisions. So I'm all the way up to 25. And again, if this was a far distance, you could get away with less. The closer it's going to be, the more fidelity, the more detail that you need. Another opportunity to talk about what a good storyboard does for you. It allows you to know where the model is in proximity to the camera and what action the rig needs to be supplying. We'll come to taper, 0.1, and we've got this. And if you want to, again, you can do modeling after the fact. Maybe this edge would be a little bit larger. Maybe this one would be a little bit larger, right? So you can get that taper going. Maybe you want another edge loop in here. We can look at that in the 3 mode. Don't forget, so this is a little bit rigid there. We can come, I've grabbed all of these, a uniform selection, and you can always use average vertexes, and that averaged that out pretty nicely. Finally, in terms of our extrusion, we'll just give ourselves a little bit of an eye. We can just pull that out, and if you wanted to make that larger, let me just show you this. I can grab a face and shift more than will get you the next level, and then we could maybe scale those to be a little bit larger. And if you wanted to, one more extrusion would probably be warranted. Pull that out. Now I'm not remembering if butterflies have eyes that big, but a lot of insects do have big bulbous eyes, and you could create that way. I moved that in local mode. We would want to have moved that in world space. Okay, so there is our basic parts, and you can come, again, look at a reference of the insect you're modeling, or if it's a butterfly. I think we probably have a little bit more up top, especially in the middle there. You can move the faces as I'm doing, or you can double click and get an entire edge. You can use soft select, right? Maybe we want to rotate this down a little bit. I'll hit the B key, the middle mouse, the B key held down with the left mouse button, scrubbing left and right changes the brush size as a reminder. And we could scale that, rotate that, and maybe we rotate that a little bit. Yeah, so you can give it a little bit of contour, a little bit of size. Use soft select. You could even use your sculpt tools, right? We've got the sculpt tool. In this, if you were using it, you'd probably get by with just using the soft select, but just as a quick reminder, we would want to have symmetry on, and you can sculpt that way. By default, it's pulling. If I hold down the M key and pull that down, I'm changing the strength. And if I hold the control key, I'm pushing. So by default, it pulls, control key, it pushes, and then shift key smooths. So you could smooth that. So you've got this base mesh, right? And that's what it truly looks like. Use your soft select, right? With fewer vertexes, it's easier to make average shapes. So you've got those. You can use soft select. You can move the vertexes or edges independently, or you can use your sculpt surfaces tool. Now you would want to save this, increment and save. You can see all the things that we did there, and we'll delete the history, and we'll place our joints. So you definitely want to save. This is your mesh unrigged, right? At every plateau, name and label. Let's create in the side view our joint, and we're going to start with a simple one. We'll bind it, and then I'll show you why what we might call dummy joints are important as well. So we're going to create some joints just for the things that we see, and then I'll demonstrate why we might want to drive those chains out longer than you would intuitively believe they should be. I'm going to hit the 4 key, and let's just lay out some joints independently. So I'm going to come to Rigging, Skeleton, Create Joints, and let's just lay one down for the neck, and then I'll hit Return. I'll reselect the tool over here, and let's put one down for the tail, or technically the abdomen, and we'll hit that, hit Return, and right, these aren't connected. And then let's put one right here. This will be, let's say, up front a little bit. This will be for the thorax, or the root of our joint chain. So we've got these 3 joints, right? They're sitting there. They aren't parented to each other, but this is going to be the root. So we'll grab our neck, shift select the root, and hit lowercase p. We know that the thick side indicates who is the parent and who is the child, right? It's pointing or getting narrower on the child side. We'll grab this joint here, shift select our root, and hit lowercase p. So here's our basic chain. This joint can control everything down here. This joint will control the abdomen, or what we might just call the tail. And we could parent in the wing joints, and you could make this fly around with the head and tail now able to move. But we probably also want the legs. So let's add a joint each for the legs, and we'll see what how the rig functions with just those joints. So we'll say create joints. This time let's open the dialog box and click on projected centering. So we want projected centering. If that's not on, it will try to snap to the grid or the 90 degree of the view that you're looking at. It'll just try to snap orthographically down. So we'll select projected centering, and when I click now, it tries to get it in the middle, which is pretty good. I'll hit enter, reselect the tool, get a good view, and we'll click there. I can use my middle mouse button to reposition if you miss it. I'll hit return, we'll come and grab, we'll hit the V key, excuse me, not the V key, we have projected centering on. We'll click that, lay that down, and we'll hit return when we're done. Now let's parent these in. So these will go to the root as well. So this is the child, shift select the root, lowercase p, child, parent, lowercase p, child, parent, lowercase p. And then we'll mirror these over. This is skeleton. Mirror joint, this would be across the YZ. YZ is selected, and so I'll hit mirror. It has to be done one at a time. Remember that the G key will execute the last tool used, so I can hit the G key and just execute that again. Pick here, G key, and now I've got that over there. So this would be kind of a minimalist rig for our insect. We have one joint each for each of the legs, so the legs could do something like that. We have one joint for this tail or abdomen, and we have one joint for the head. We're going to bind this, and you always want to save before you bind. And we also want to UV map before you bind, before you smooth. If we look at the UV now, right, this really doesn't make any sense. Because our insect, or this insect, is completely black, we can get away without creating the UV. But it's at this point, before you move on to the rig, before you move on to binding, we would smooth it. Typically, you're smoothing it once. Um, and you can create the UV map after that. You can create the UV map on any level of subdivision or number of smooths. It just becomes more and more difficult because you have more and more information. So it's always a good idea to UV map on your box model or your subdivision 0, the base mesh. We're not going to talk about UV mapping here, other than let me just mention for a quick UV map. Let's say you were doing an insect other than the butterfly and you wanted to get a quick UV map going. Let's just planar project straight down on the Y, and you can at least now see your insect. And then if you wanted to come along and cut, or let's say after the fact we subdivide, ooh, and I see there, I did this asymmetrically. So this, some reason I got something going on the eye here that I didn't get on the other side. What I'd want to do in that case is just select it and remirror it over. Let's just do that. Let me just show you that in case this happened to you. I don't want my joints on. And you have to decide which one you like. So I'm going to get rid of this side. What's going to be a challenge here is selecting, because that soft select off. We'll get those. And yeah, this is the very end of that proboscis, right? We've got some there. So we have to get in nice and tight and make sure you're not selecting over the center line. So we've got that. All right, and the tail would be the other potential problem. And we'll mirror this geometry again. So if you accidentally get something going asymmetrically, like I did there, you just delete the half that you don't want. And we'll mirror this over. In this case, it's positive x, so x positive. We've got that. There we go. And always a good idea to hit merge threshold 0.01, especially with those very tight vertexes. Okay. Well, I noticed that here. We'll re-project it, UV planar, and we see now that that's working. And even if you don't take the time to cut these things apart, at least you have a starting point UV map, so that when you smooth later on, it would be a little bit more practical than if you were just starting without having any UV. And just a quick note on that process, right? We would just select edge. We would cut the legs apart, probably cut this apart, and yeah, each of those pieces. For a detailed explanation of UV mapping the insect, I'll put a link in the description for the upcoming 3rd generation insect, and that's where we really emphasize UV mapping. But not a bad idea, just a UV planar project before we proceed here. Okay, picking up where we left off, before that digression, we want to smooth once, mesh, smooth, or of course if you were in the modeling toolkit, you could hit the smooth here. And right, you can hit the 3 key on this and see, oops, now I have some vertexes that didn't get welded. So I'm going to just take a look here and see. I think this is probably helpful. Yeah, so those didn't get welded. I can grab those, make sure I don't have anything on the bottom. I'll hit the 4 and the F to be able to see. And I'm not going to use the target weld. We'll just come to mesh, edit mesh, merge. And where was the other? I think here. I'll just hit the G key, right? Or edit mesh, merge. And I can do the same thing there. And when I hit the 3 key, Now I've got these extra edges here. I'm going to grab and delete those. We'll say Edit Mesh, Delete Edge Vertex. And now we're good. So, oh, and some other ones. Yeah, I'll just delete these faces. And we'll merge these two. Now in that case, well, we could use the merge command as well. Edit Mesh, merge. And then we'll, yeah. So with that, I had a lot of fine vertex positions when I mirrored. I typed in 0.01, maybe should have typed in 0.1. Some of those were far enough apart that they didn't merge, so I had to manually merge them. Deleted the faces to be able to see which points I needed to merge. Selected those, and then went to Mesh, Edit Mesh, Merge, in case that happened to you as well. Okay, so we've got this smoothed just one time. In terms of workflow, for a character like this, we would probably use a normal map rather than smooth it a second time, right? That first one is a subdivision 0. This would be considered subdivision 1, or it is subdivision 1. We've subdivided it once. You could subdivide it a second time. Then you're getting to be a little bit inefficient. We would make a duplicate, smooth that one, export a normal map, and then we could bring that normal map onto this subdivision 1 and get the visual smoothness of that second subdivision with the economy of a single subdivision. We'll talk a lot more about normal maps in the second semester when we have more complex projects and more complex models, and we need that efficiency. For the simple scenes in this semester, we can get away with subdividing once or twice and not impact the efficiency of the production. Okay, now we're going to bind this. We're going to come to rigging. We'll select that and we'll come to skin, bind skin, open the dialog box. And we see here, I'm just going to hit reset. There are lots of options and there are lots of methods, but let's just take a look at it in the default. We'll click bind and we can pick one of these joints and see how it deforms the object. So we'll rotate that one, and a couple of things are happening here, right? It seems to be squishing down, and these legs and part of the thorax here, the center section, are also being affected when we only want down chain here to be affected. What's happened is the binding method doesn't know that these vertexes should only be applied here and not to this joint. This is the process of weight painting. And again, in that third generation video insect lesson, it really goes through methodically the weight painting. But we're going to try and keep this really simple. So in this case, rather than doing a lot of weight painting, and you can use this in conjunction with weight painting actually, we'll give ourselves additional joints so that the vertexes know where they should go. The vertexes are going to be weighted towards the closest joint. So without joints here, these vertexes are being driven by this joint all the way up to here. So let's give them something to adhere to. Likewise, right, this deformation is happening because this isn't all 100%. If we looked at the weight paint, it would be gray or a gradient across there. So we'll unbind it. I'm going to select that, say skin unbind, and the color goes away, which is an indicator, and then you can also see when I rotate the joint, it's unbound. And let's lay down some extra joints here. So I'm going to come to create joints and make sure projected centering is on. And we'll just draw out these little chains here. Now I missed that one, or it missed it, right? It should have been projected centering. So if that happens, remember your middle mouse button. And if you bring it back, it'll try to snap. Another method is just to hold down the V key, and you can snap it there. And return when I'm done. and we'll just come around. So there's enough geometry there where it knows where the center is. There's about enough there, but it tends to miss that terminal one just because it's so small. Oops, and I missed this one. So again, we can just V, or you can get it close, and V to lay that down. Enter when we're done. Oops, and this should be a lot down further if I'm matching that. So to change, right, the D key is the same thing, and we can hold the V and get that snap down there. Enter when we're done. Grab the new tool. We'll hit here and here, dolly around, make sure that worked, and then maybe just use the V key to lay that down, and we'll hit enter. Now, let's parent these in. So this should go here. I'm selecting the rest of the leg, shift selecting here, lowercase p, here and here, lowercase p. And I'm going to delete these, right, so that we can mirror together. So we'll pick, and we have to mirror one at a time. We'll pick here, and I can just use the G key to get that over. So now the vertexes, even if we didn't want to really move the leg all that much, even if that single joint would have been enough just to have the legs kind of do something like this for a middle distance shot, we've added some additional joints so that those vertexes know where to bind to. I'll do one out here at the end, and when we're working along that center line. So let's maybe give ourselves 2, and then we'll shift select and lowercase p, and let's give ourselves, I'm not going to draw this all the way out. That level of complexity in painting is a little bit beyond this intermediate version. But again, if you wanted that strange tongue-like piece to roll out, that would be the insect playlist video, which is our 3rd generation or advanced insect on lowercase p. But what this will give us, now we'll come and pick the geometry, shift select the joint chain, we'll come to skin, bind skin, and now when we move this, right, you see that the legs aren't being adversely affected because they know where they should be, because these joints are closer to where those vertexes are. And we get a little bit of bend here, right, for a middle distance shot, and the head is working fine. And yeah, I'm gonna get rid of my curves here. We no longer need those. Yeah, and now you can see if I try to do the tail, excuse me, the tongue here, we're getting some strange deformation. I could put some vertexes, excuse me, some joints out here, but let me just demo painting just really quick what weight painting is. We're not going to do weight painting on this guy, but for that 3rd generation you will. With the surface selected, come to skin, paint skin weights, and open this. And I'll right click on this joint here that says select influence. And I can see that there's gray. In terms of weighting, black means off, white means on, and gray is anywhere in between. So, and for something like this, we could rotate it. You see that those eyes have been affected by this joint. We didn't want them. If we had some joints here, that would have solved it the way that putting joints here solved the tail. The tail shouldn't affect the leg. Without these joints, the leg didn't know where it should be attached to. So when we added those, it locked these vertices onto the leg, and this functioned properly. Here, these vertexes are as close to the joint as they are to the neck joint. In fact, they're a little bit closer. So we'll rotate this down, and then we're going to paint it off. We can paint white, we can paint black, we can paint anywhere in between. So I'm going to say add -1. Oops, let's get the object selected. There we go. And you can see you paint it off, and it's snapping back to where it should have been originally. Lots of methods, lots of techniques here. But what the takeaway is It's a combination of joint placement, having enough joints for the vertexes, creating these dummy joints, right? My joints here wouldn't really be driving the eye position. I would put those joints there not for deformation's sake, but for the sake of the vertex knowing where to be connected to. So, and that's what we're calling dummy joints. They don't actually drive anything, but they are there to anchor your rig. So now if we look at this, I rotate it, you see that those eyes aren't being affected, right? So that's what weight painting is. No need to get that complicated with this guy, and you can always zero things out. We'll zero that out. We can bring back, so play with that. You can get away with just a very simple, if you just wanted to have each of the 3 joints for the leg, the joint for the tail, the joint for the head. So that would be 6, 7, 8, 9. A 9-joint chain would be the minimum. Get that under your belt, and then you'll be prepared for that next generation. The concepts will make more sense. And then if you have the time and you'd like to build out, you could even build out lots of the tail. You could build out more of this tongue shape here. You could do that depending on the time that you have. If you wanted to get into the weight painting, you can watch the section of the next playlist, and that will give you a good overview, especially to paint something that's a little bit simpler here. Now, I mentioned at the beginning we're going to leave the wings separate, and I think they're on a layer, and we can just parent these back in. So there is my wing, and I want to parent it to the root. Selectability becomes a little bit difficult in here. So let's, right here is our joint chain. So I'll use the command key to select that. In fact, let's just name this here so we can remember it. So here's wing left joint. I'll command select the root and lowercase p. Here is wing right joint. Command select the root joint, lowercase p. And now we've got our second gen. We'll come back out of there, out of texture, and we have our second gen. This will function nicely from a distance right about there. You can get some basic animation, right? If you want to have a little bit of movement so it looks a little natural, that looks okay. You could grab these 2 joints, and maybe as it's flying or taking off, right, there's a little bit of movement there, just so that it doesn't look so stiff. Grab the legs, and you can key a little bit of movement. If you wanted this to jump up and get onto a path, remember that you would pick the root joint, group it to itself, and then we could just call that path. So you can key all of these joints. You can assign it to a path and have it fly around. All right, questions in the discussion forum. Have a good one.